Also this morning then is Todd Palmer. He's an equity partner and chair in the environmental practice group in the law firm Michael Besson Friedrich. Over the last 24 years, he's represented a diverse group of clients on a wide range of environmental issues. Todd has been named a leader in his field by the International Legal Ranking Organization of Chambers and Partners, and he was recently admitted into the American College of Environmental Lawyers and named Environmental Lawyer of the Year for his geographic practice area by the publication Best Lawyers in America. So we have a great pair of speakers here who will be able to give us a lot of valuable perspectives from very different stakeholder groups about the Clean Power Plan and what they see it going in the next few years. So.
Just a couple of comments just to start out. I hope not, but at the end of my brief presentation, I suspect some of you will be asking who invited this guy to our Clean Power Plan party. That's not my intent. The three of us talked a little before in preparing for this presentation. And there was a desire to present some other thinking and other perspectives with respect to this rule. And that is my role today. In terms of background, I've represented a very broad swath of interests under the Clean Air Act. I've certainly represented a fair number of investor-owned utilities, the targets of this type of program. I've also represented municipal utilities, third-party project developers, renewable energy developers, meeting in several weeks with another university. They're trying to develop carbon capture technology, and we're helping them with that. So a very broad swath of interests that I've represented. And I want to try to present some of those perspectives to you in the brief time I have. One thing I wanted to start with is there's this presumption, I believe, that we really have not done much as a government or as society here in the United States to reduce our carbon footprint. And that's simply not true. And I want to spend just a second to go through some of the things that we have done, because it's important to recognize that, especially with Paris coming up. We should take credit for it. It didn't take me very long to put down a fairly lengthy list. I debated whether to go through it. I'll try to get through it very quickly. Department of Energy has put together a very broad swath of appliance and building efficiency standards. If you look at the estimated greenhouse gas reductions from those rules, you're looking at like 3 billion metric tons of reduction cumulatively by 2030. To put that in perspective, the Clean Power Plan's clocking in somewhere around 800 million metric tons, something like that, by the same time period. Clean Air Act, Title II has a variety of programs within it. That's the transportation sector. The light duty fuel economy standards are out. We have similar rules for the medium and heavy duty vehicles. Combined, those are about 120 million metric tons in reductions. We have a renewable fuel standard that last year clocked in at about 15 billion with a B gallons of renewable fuel. And I have to say, in my opinion, the biggest impediment to expanding that program has been the EPA, quite frankly. We certainly could do quite a bit more in that space if the EPA were a little bit more cooperative. President Obama has issued a directive to the federal government asking that they reduce their emissions, greenhouse gas carbon footprint, that is. We're looking about 28 million metric tons there. We have an HFC replacement program under the Clean Air Act, Title VI. It's one of the few occasions within the Clean Air Act where Congress actually specified a cap and trade program. That program's clocking in somewhere around 70 million metric tons. We have the oil and gas exploration and landfill methane standards that were discussed earlier, I think by some folks asking questions, and Dr. Hedman mentioned them as well. Those combined are about 130 million metric tons. All of those things I just referenced are very clear directives from Congress under the Clean Air Act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They're not very controversial. They're not getting much attention, but collectively, that's a very significant commitment by us as society. We turn to states. Virtually every state at this point has a renewable portfolio standard for renewable energy generation. This state certainly has one. Many states have energy efficiency programs. Wisconsin has one of the best in the country, our Focus on Energy program. Very significant in reducing energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions. I do a lot of enforcement defense work, and I've tried to work with EPA Region 5 to get them to recognize the benefits of the Focus on Energy program in the context of mitigation projects, then they wouldn't do it. These are programs that now apparently are going to be recognized, and they should. We have numerous commitments to shut down coal-fired power plants that are being driven by EPA-initiated litigation under their New Source Review initiative. Anywhere from 40 to 60 gigawatts of existing coal power generation is on target to be retired. Very significant set of reductions there. And then, of course, we have co-benefits from the alphabet soup of utility regulations that we have out there. BART, MATS rule, CASPER, Boiler MAC, National Ambient Air Quality Standards, all of them have contributed to additional greenhouse gas reductions. The final one is actually something that hasn't been dictated by federal government, and I think it's probably the largest driver of reductions in the utility sector, and that's the technological advancements that have been made with fracking. I know it's very controversial, but it has driven natural gas prices down from $12 to $13 per decatherm. We're now around, what, $2.50 to $4? That is huge, folks. That has been a massive driver in getting greenhouse gas emissions to reduce. So what does the Clean Power Plan add to all that? Quite candidly, and I know it's going to upset some folks, but not a whole lot. If you look at what the ENGOs had said when this rule came out on August 3rd, one called it, the actions were practically worthless. I think getting at we need to do much, much more was their expectation. If you look at the preamble to the Clean Power Plan, EPA stopped short of actually saying it, but they really infer that the direction and trajectory of the power sector right now, largely because of the cost of natural gas, is going to get us to these goals anyway, without the Clean Power Plan. If we look at climate metrics, I have scoured the documents that EPA put together. I didn't see anywhere where they actually had the metrics of what impact will this have. There are commenters out there that have done the modeling using EPA's models, and I'm sure this is controversial, but the numbers I have are 1/100th of a degree Celsius in averted global warming, and roughly the same magnitude, about 1/100th of an inch in terms of averted sea level rise. Those could be off by an order of magnitude. I'm sure they're controversial, but even off an order of magnitude, I don't think it's that great. So why are we doing this? Well, we have the Paris talks that are coming up, and this administration wants to walk in with a loaded deck, so to speak, to negotiate with other countries to get their commitments to reduce CO2 emissions. I get that. But again, I revert back to where I started. We've already done quite a bit. There's a lot that we can give in that negotiation, a lot that we can point to. I'm getting older. My wife and kids tell me that all the time, and I'm getting pretty cynical, and at least at this point I recognize it. But I've been working with the Clean Air Act for quite some time. I see some familiar faces out there that have been working in this area too, and I got to tell you, I think another driver here is what I call regulatory creep. The idea there is that EPA comes out with a program, a very aggressive one, and they pitch it originally as being very reasonable. It's not very difficult to get this done. Once they survive and weather the legal challenges, at that point they start ratcheting down the controls. We've seen that in other contexts. One thing that's going to be talked about, I think, in the next session would be the Ozone Standard. When I came to Wisconsin in 1992 and started practicing law, that standard was 120 ppb. Now we're roughly half that as of a couple weeks ago. So, you know, these things continue to be driven lower and lower, and there's a variety of other examples. One of the commenters or questioners, I think appropriately asked about, well, where is this going? I think globally, really the target is much more ambitious than what we're seeing with the Clean Power Plan. We're looking at, you know, an 80% reduction by 2050 on a global level. That's the lens by which a lot of my clients are looking at this program. There's concerns with process. 2008, candidate Obama had a very, I wouldn't say famous, I wouldn't say popular, but there's a video out there on YouTube, an interview that he had provided to a San Francisco paper. It's been quoted quite a few times for two propositions. One is he mentions that a cap and trade program would cause skyrocketing, I think that's his phrase, of electric rates, and also would bankrupt coal companies. Put those aside for a moment. The thing I focused on was the statement that he made that the trick to getting this done is to make sure that the people's elected representatives can get on board with this type of program. In other words, we're going to go to Congress to get this done. We all know that that didn't work. And for that reason, the Clean Air Act was looked at as the mechanism by which emission reductions would be achieved in the utility sector for CO2. Sean did a great job of going through some of the litigation that supported that and supported EPA's efforts, so the courts certainly have backfilled there. But at least from my view of the world, the Clean Air Act was not established to do what it is that's attempted here. I look at a couple things to make that point. One is if the Clean Power Plan truly was something that Congress envisioned to be the tool, and 111D to be the tool to control CO2 emissions from the utility sector, why didn't EPA engage in a pollutant planning process? The utility industry has dealt with a variety of Clean Air Act initiatives clearly authorized under the Clean Air Act. At no point that I'm aware of did this Clean Power Plan idea, 111D, enter into that equation or be factored into the emission reductions that are demanded under those programs. I'm talking about BART, MATS, Interstate Transport Rules, Boiler Act, Ambient Air Quality Standards, things along those lines. The other thing would be failure to integrate with state energy planning. I think one of the most prevalent comments and the principal comments that you would receive from states would have, on the proposed Clean Power Plan, would have been, it doesn't fully recognize the work that we've done up to this point. And I think Dr. Hedman acknowledged in response to a question that renewable activities that were undertaken prior to 2013 are not credited under this program. There again, it's not really integrated with the work that's been done on the state level. If we look here in Wisconsin, over the last 10 years, we've had, the number I've seen is anywhere from $10 to $11 billion that have been invested in our generation and infrastructure system. Those decisions were rendered after a contentious process, a very inclusive process, one that looked at a whole host of different policy variables in our state and the unique aspects of energy use here. It was a well thought out process, a lot of modeling and whatnot. Those decisions were made, I wouldn't say they're completely negated or usurped by the Clean Power Plan, but they're certainly going to be affected. And I think for the first time that I'm aware of in this state, we're going to be looking at stranded asset issues, and we're going to have to deal with that. How are those going to be paid for? Are the types of things that we're going to have to be discussing going forward if this rule stands. I think EPA would respond to some of these criticisms that I'm raising and suggest that, well, we built a lot of flexibility, a lot of autonomy for states within the rule. And that certainly is true, and I think Dr. Hedman did a good job of showing all that flexibility. But all that flexibility fits within, really, a cap-and-trade program. States really don't have much flexibility to participate in a cap-and-trade program. That's something they're going to have to do. The other is you have to reduce your utilization of coal-fired generation. I just don't see any way around that, and that is not flexible. The thing you have to keep in mind is those rates that you saw, the 1,300 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour for a coal-fired steam generating unit, that's about half of what a modern plant would do. So without technology to bolt on the end of that coal plant, the way you get that number down is you have to go through cap and trade. You have to reduce the utilization of those coal plants. There's just no way around that in my mind. So the reality is this has to be dealt with. Dr. Hedman's absolutely right. This is the law of the land, that's for sure. So let me round this out quickly and just give you the perspective that I would assign to different interest groups that are facing Clean Power Plan compliance issues. First would be utilities. First comment I'd have there, and I think this may shock some folks here, others it won't, but I don't see utilities as being policy driven largely. They're like other companies. They're driven by profit, they're driven by costs and the like. Certainly they have moral obligations that they feel for climate change issues, for sure. They also feel obligated and I think do the best job they can at keeping rates reasonable for their customers. But again, they're profit-oriented. If you look at things from their perspective, I would say utilities are probably one of the best sectors out in the economy at putting iron into the ground. You tell them where you want to be, and you know what? They're great at getting you there and finding the money to get you there. The thing that I think they look at the Clean Power Plan with is they're looking for that sanctuary that would be provided by certainty. And the Clean Power Plan does not provide that. It's so aggressive, and it's such a, what I think the courts, well, I'll leave it at this. It's going to be somewhat of a tenuous argument in front of the courts. This is going to be litigated for quite some time. I think utilities would have preferred, again, a purposely created program by Congress that provides some certainty. So utilities are very good at doing those types of things, investing in the generation infrastructure. They get rewarded for doing that with being given the ability to return, get a rate of return on their investments into those assets, and usually that's 10 to 12%. That puts them at odds with the other group that I think is getting a little bit short shrift in this discussion, and that's large ratepayers. I represent a large number of those. So these are companies that write checks for about $1 million for every month for their electric bills. They have been seeing these rates continue to increase under the other alphabet soup of Clean Air Act requirements that have been imposed on utilities that I mentioned earlier. They have the Clean Power Plan that's layering on top of that. And a lot of these companies, folks, I'm telling you, they're in what I call a structural budget deficit. Okay, they have costs coming in here in terms of electric rates, but they don't have a way to recoup those costs like a utility would. They're competing globally in the marketplace, and they can't, more or less, bring in additional revenue through raising rates or price of their products. That's a real problem for them. So they're going to have to start looking for ways to deal with those rate increases. And I suspect that we're going to see even more pressure coming from those large ratepayers to find ways to maybe challenge the traditional way that we've regulated power in this country. And I got to tell you, I see that as a real issue that utilities are going to have to face up to. It's been kind of bubbling in the background, but I think the Clean Power Plan is unique in that it's providing opportunities to revisit the way that utilities are regulated. I'm not sure if it's going to go so far as retail choice, which would be an atomic bomb on that industry, but decoupling from rate increases is something that I think large ratepayers are going to look at. Increased distributed generation, third-party ownership of distributed generation are going to be an issue. The other big threat in their mind would be the regulatory creep, that this template that's been established is going to be applied to them at some point. And we're talking here in terms of redispatching renewable energy resources, decreasing demand side use of power. That's fancy speak in the other sectors of the economy is destroying demand for your product. If I'm a coal plant operator, this rule is destroying demand for my electrons that I'm producing. Now, if you put yourself in the petroleum industry that Dr. Hedman mentioned may be the next target, if you look at this type of infrastructure, they too are providing a ubiquitous product, gasoline, fossil fuels, out onto a distribution network. Could this regulatory mechanism be overlaid into that industry where they're focusing on destroying the demand for the product? What about the paper industry? Granted, that's a stretch. But why not regulate CO2 emissions by saying, why is Palmer here today with notes? Why doesn't he bring an iPad? Why don't we regulate on that end? I think that's a bridge too far, I admit that. But I think the petroleum industry is certainly one that's looking at this rule with that concern in mind. And I know EPA has initially asserted that's not their intent for that sector. Rounding this out, energy developers see a lot of opportunities here. Yeah, if you're making wind turbines, solar panels, good opportunity for you, so long as you can get into that space, that the IOUs, the regulated utilities, don't dominate it. Biomass. Biomass is a huge fuel source in the upper Midwest and other parts of this country. I got to tell you, biomass regulation from EPA right now is quite a mess. And the Clean Power Plan doesn't do anything in my mind to really improve that. Essentially dumps everything to the states and says, states, you figure out what's carbon neutral and the like, you work it out with a proponent in your state, put a plan together, send it to us, we'll let you know if you got it right. Combined heat and power for industrial sources certainly is something that I think has potential. Demand response programs, that also is getting some attention. As mentioned earlier, there's also companies that are developing carbon capture and sequestration technologies. Let me end this part by making this point. I think all of these issues are starting to combine the Clean Power Plan, ratepayer issues, and I think utilities internally and some of them externally are starting to look at the way that they do business, and I think they're starting to reevaluate that. I think for the longest time, electrons have been viewed as a fungible commodity. There really is not much of a differentiation out in the marketplace for the product that they're producing, but I think that's starting to change. And I think in order for them to continue to thrive and to continue with their business model, they're going to have to reevaluate that and look at ways where they can differentiate the services that they're providing and even the products that they're providing out in the marketplace. And for us here in Wisconsin, I think a company that's a good example of that would be Madison Gas and Electric. Just last week, they announced a community solar project, which, in my assessment on the broader scale, looks as if they are attempting to do just that, provide their customers with different choices in terms of the type of energy that's being produced and allowing the marketplace to react to that. And I think we might be seeing more and more of that going forward. So with that, let me stop and open it up for questions, which I assume a lot of you have. So thank you.